I was feeling really good when I was called into Mr. Alistair's big, glass-walled corner office. I thought it was finally time to sign the $1.8 billion novice tech acquisition deal. I had spent the last 2 years of my life building this deal, working weekends and late nights to make it perfect. I walked in, ready to talk about the final details, maybe even celebrate a little. But instead of seeing files, I saw his nephew, Caleb, standing right next to Mr. Alistair, wearing a suit that was clearly too expensive for him. Mr. Alistair didn't even smile. He just looked down at his desk and spoke in a cold, hard voice. He told me I was being let go, effective right now because of company restructuring. He said Caleb would be taking over as the deal lead, starting immediately. My stomach dropped like a stone. I felt dizzy. Caleb just stood there with a smug, knowing look on his face. It was completely unfair. Before I could even speak, a security guard was there. I was escorted out of the building, carrying my few personal things in a sad little cardboard box, while my whole office watched in total, stunned silence. The humiliation felt huge, like a physical weight pressing down on me. I got home and threw the cardboard box onto the floor of my apartment. I sat at my home desk, staring at the empty space where my work computer used to sit. The shock I felt when I was fired quickly turned into a burning, white-hot rage. I felt like I had been punched in the gut and then robbed blind. I opened my personal laptop and that's when I saw it. An email from Mr. Alistair, sent to everyone in the entire company just moments after I was escorted out. The subject line was big and bold. It announced Caleb's well-deserved promotion to lead the massive novice tech deal. The email praised Caleb's fresh perspective and great energy. It was like my 2 years of tireless, perfect work. The 2 years that built this $1.8 billion deal had been completely erased. It was as if I never existed. My identity, my career, my success, it had all been stolen and handed to a lazy nephew in an expensive suit. I pounded my fist on the desk. They thought they had won. They were terribly, terribly wrong. I sat there in my quiet home office, looking at my personal laptop screen, feeling a strange mix of anger and cold calmness. They didn't know the most important thing about me. They didn't know about Project Sphinx. For months, I had been building this project in secret, completely on my own time. It was a super complicated, smart risk assessment algorithm. It could analyze huge business deals like the novice tech acquisition far deeper and better than the simple models the Zenith Group used. I had always kept it totally separate from my work files, never handing it over. I always told myself it was just for my own personal practice, but deep down, I had a strange, powerful gut feeling that I might need it someday. That feeling now seemed like a prophecy. They had stolen my job and my deal, but they hadn't stolen my mind or my code. I still had Project Sphinx, and it still had remote access to all of its old findings. This secret program was my weapon, my final, powerful act of defiance against their greed and betrayal. With a new, cold focus, I told Project Sphinx to run one last, deep diagnostic on the novice tech acquisition data. I watched the screen glow with complex graphs and lines of code. The program word, analyzing the mountains of financial information that I had collected over the past 2 years. When the results popped up, my blood ran cold. Project Sphinx hadn't just found a small problem. It highlighted a catastrophic, hidden flaw that no one in the Zenith Group's main office had noticed. Novice Tech's main source of money, the thing that made the company valuable, was actually propped up by a single, very shaky patent. Worse, that patent was currently under a secret, very serious legal challenge. This legal problem had been carefully buried deep in the filings, hoping no one would ever find it. If that patent was lost in court, the entire $1.8 billion valuation would crash. The whole deal, the one Mr. Alistair was rushing to sign, was nothing more than a huge, expensive house of cards, ready to blow down at the slightest breeze. A day after my firing, my former colleague, Tristan, called me from a secure line. Tristan was always kind and ethical, and he felt terrible about how I had been treated. He became my eyes and ears inside the Zenith Group. He told me that Caleb was rushing everything. He was pushing the deal forward aggressively, acting like a little king who didn't have to follow any rules. Caleb is dismissing all the standard due diligence processes, Tristan whispered over the phone. He's calling them bureaucratic slowdowns, like they're just annoying rules. Mr. Alastair is loving it. He keeps praising Caleb's decisiveness and his fast action. They think they're geniuses, but they're just being stupid. I listened to Tristan's reports, horrified but also grimly fascinated. They were completely blind, so blinded by their greed and arrogance that they were sailing the $1.8 billion ship directly into the giant, hidden iceberg that I could clearly see. They had replaced the expert with a fool, and now, the consequences were rushing toward them. Fast. I couldn't just rely on Tristan's reports. I needed to see the chaos for myself. I remembered a tiny, almost invisible backdoor I had built into my old work account. It was a little digital key that allowed Project Sphinx to see the company's live financial data feeds for diagnostic purposes. I logged in using the special key. What I saw made my stomach churn with anger. I watched, horrified and fascinated, as Caleb, the so-called new expert, input blatantly incorrect and overly optimistic data into the company's complex financial models. He was making the novice tech deal look even more profitable and less risky than it actually was. The system I had spent months building, the very safeguards designed to stop this kind of reckless error, were being ignored and overridden by Caleb's stupid, arrogant clicks. I saw comments from other analysts asking questions, but Caleb just marked them as resolved, without ever answering them. They had tossed aside my careful work, my years of expertise, for the sake of a smug, incompetent relative. They were building their tower of lies with my stolen tools. I looked at the giant screen, which showed the Project Sphinx data screaming red warnings about the novice tech patent issue. I knew I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I faced a difficult choice, one that kept me awake all night. Choice 1. I could let the deal go through and watch the Zenith Group implode, but that would hurt hundreds of innocent colleagues who had nothing to do with Mr. Alastair's betrayal. Choice 2. I could try to warn them myself, but Mr. Alastair would just scream, sabotage, and try to sue me for revenge. I would look like a bitter, crazy ex-employee. I decided on a third path, a better path. I would not warn the traitors at the Zenith Group. I would ensure that the right people, the people on the other side of the deal, the ones who were about to lose $1.8 billion, found out the truth. That way, the deal would be stopped, the bad guys would lose their prize, and my hands would remain completely clean. It was the perfect, cold, and calculated revenge. My next step was to become a ghost, a helpful, powerful digital spirit that no one could ever trace. I spent hours setting up an untraceable digital identity. I used a strong VPN, multiple proxy servers, and a completely anonymous email account. I felt like a spy in a movie, but this was real life, and the stakes were very real. I sat down and started to craft my first message. I wrote an anonymous email to the chief executive officer of Vanguard Capital, the huge company that was about to buy Novice Tech. I knew the CEO was sharp and wouldn't ignore a serious warning. My email was short, formal, and meticulously detailed. I didn't give away everything. I highlighted the exact, catastrophic patent issue with just enough specific, verifiable information about the legal challenge to make it seem credible and scary, but not enough to reveal that the information came from my secret Project Sphinx program. It was a seed of doubt, planted deep in the buyer's mind. I hit send, and then instantly deleted the burner account and cleared my computer history. I waited for the chaos to begin. The very next day, my sympathetic colleague, Tristan, sent me a message. His tone was a mix of confusion and fear. He reported that the entire mood at the Zenith Group had changed overnight. Vanguard Capital had suddenly become unreasonably difficult, he said. They were asking for new, intense audits, specifically asking for information about Novice Tech's intellectual property, the exact patent issue I had flagged. Caleb was completely flustered and running around the office like a chicken with its head cut off. He couldn't answer the questions because he didn't even understand the problem. Mr. Alastair was furious, but he wasn't mad at Caleb. He was blaming Vanguard Capital's incompetence for suddenly delaying the deal. The irony was so rich it was sickening. They were so arrogant, so convinced of their own brilliance, that they couldn't possibly imagine that their own incompetence had been exposed by the person they had just fired. The seed of doubt had taken root, and it was growing fast. The signing date for the deal was now only a few days away, but Vanguard Capital's demands were only growing stronger. Tristan reported the incredible tension inside the Zenith Group. Vanguard's lawyers and financial experts had clearly found something important. They started demanding to speak to the original lead analyst who had first prepared the deal's data. They wanted to speak to me, Jennifer. Mr. Alastair refused instantly. He doubled down on his incompetent nephew, yelling that Caleb was the only person Vanguard would deal with. He was too proud and too afraid of admitting his mistake to let me come back, even for one meeting. I watched the internal chaos escalate through my digital backdoor. I saw Alastair screaming at his assistant, and Caleb trying to delete his reckless data inputs. The fear was spreading like a poison. They were trapped, forced to rely on the fool who was causing all the problems, because the true expert had been thrown out of the building. I knew I had to make the next warning even stronger to make sure Vanguard Capital backed out completely. So, I sent a second, much more detailed anonymous message to Vanguard, this time including specific names and dates related to the patent challenge. It was the information that proved the deal was rotten. But this time, I made a mistake. The message was slightly too detailed, and the Zenith Group's legal team, already working overtime, managed to trace a piece of the information back to the company's internal servers. They knew the leak had come from someone who had deep knowledge of the deal structure. Mr. Alastair immediately accused me of corporate sabotage and sent me a furious, threatening email saying he would sue me for millions. I was terrified. The risk was real, but I didn't back down. I held my ground and deleted the email, knowing that without solid proof, all they had was the word of a vengeful, fired boss. The tension broke dramatically. The next day, Vanguard Capital, completely unable to get satisfactory answers from the Zenith Group and thoroughly spooked by my precise anonymous warnings, publicly announced a major change. They were re-evaluating the acquisition. They said the decision was based on material inconsistencies found in the final days of due diligence. The news was a complete disaster for the Zenith Group. Their stock immediately plummeted in value. It was a massive financial earthquake. The news headlines across the world were brutal, questioning the stability and honesty of the Zenith Group's leadership. I watched the news reports on my own television, feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory. The company that had stolen my career was now suffering a huge, very public financial loss, and they had no idea who was really responsible. I just knew the final, ultimate blow was coming very soon. The final blow came exactly 1 week after Mr. Alastair had coldly fired me. It was a day that changed the entire industry. Vanguard Capital formally terminated the massive $1.8 billion novice tech acquisition deal. It was over. The press release issued by Vanguard was cold and completely unforgiving. It specifically cited previously undisclosed material risks within Novice Tech's intellectual property portfolio, confirming everything I knew to be true. The deal was officially dead, not because the market was bad, but because the foundational product was flawed. The press immediately jumped on the story. The headlines now read billion-dollar deal collapses due to IP scandal and Zenith Group leadership questioned. The humiliation was total. Mr. Alastair had fired the only person who could have saved him and replaced her with the very person who ensured his doom. He had chosen family loyalty over competence, and he was now paying the highest possible price. The moment the deal was terminated, the Zenith Group entered a complete crisis mode. It was pure internal destruction. Tristan, my eyes inside, said the office was like a ghost town, filled with fear and hushed anger. The board of directors immediately launched a severe internal investigation into the massive failure, demanding every email, every report, and every financial model related to the Novice Tech deal. Layoffs were announced almost immediately as the company tried to cut costs after the huge stock plummet. Mr. Alastair and his nephew, Caleb, were instantly placed on administrative leave, which is the corporate way of saying they were banned from the office while the lawyers started working. The employees who were still there were furious, knowing that their jobs and the company's reputation were ruined because of one man's greed and another's incompetence. The whole place was a mess of fear, anger, and betrayal, and I was watching it all from the complete safety of my quiet home. Mr. Alastair, desperate and facing the end of his decades-long career, tried one last, dirty trick to save himself. He gave a huge, aggressive statement to the board of directors. He blamed me entirely for the disaster. He claimed I was the mastermind of revenge. He told the board that I had intentionally set the deal up to fail, knowing about the patent issue, and then sabotaged it from the outside after he dismissed me. He painted a picture of me as a bitter, vengeful genius who had planned the collapse of the $1.8 billion deal just to hurt him. It was a complete lie, but it was a great, dramatic story that he hoped the board would believe. He threw every false accusation he could think of at me, trying to cover his tracks and save his reputation by turning me into the corporate villain. He thought I was helpless and that his powerful words would stick. But the internal investigation by the board was smart and thorough. It wasn't fooled by Mr. Alastair's desperate lies. The legal team started pulling up all the real data and the internal communications. They quickly uncovered the truth. Caleb's financial models were completely incorrect and full of optimistic mistakes. They found emails from Mr. Alastair pressuring his staff to ignore the proper due diligence procedures, demanding they just approve everything quickly. The most damning piece of evidence was the discovery of my original risk assessment reports from 6 months ago, the ones I had written before I even built Project Sphinx. These reports had already flagged the potential IP risks in novice tech months ago, and the investigation found a clear email chain where Mr. Alastair had angrily ordered me to drop the issue and stop worrying about small details. The truth was undeniable. I had warned them, and they had silenced me. The board finally knew the full, ugly truth. The reckoning was swift and completely humiliating for both of them. Just a few days after the investigation's findings were released, Mr. Alastair and his nephew Caleb were publicly fired. The official public announcement from the Zenith Group was brutal. It stated they were fired for gross negligence and misconduct, which are the words that end a career forever. The public firing was a humiliating end to Mr. Alastair's decades-long career in the industry. He was now seen as a failure and a fool who let personal ties ruin the company. The whole business industry immediately blacklisted him. No other reputable firm would ever hire him again. Caleb, who had never done a single day of real, honest work, was left with nothing but a ruined family name and a reputation for incompetence. The industry had cheered their downfall. Justice had been served, cold and public. The phone call came 2 days later. It was the chairman of the Zenith Group's board of directors himself. His voice was heavy and formal, but clearly regretful. He apologized profusely for how I had been treated, saying that Mr. Alastair's actions did not represent the true values of the company. It was a huge, humbling apology. Then he made his offer. He wanted me to return to the Zenith Group immediately. He offered me my old job back, but with a massive, instant promotion that put me in charge of an entire division. He offered me a huge salary increase, much bigger than anything I had ever made before. And to top it off, he offered me a signing bonus that was a giant check, meant to fully compensate me for the humiliation and the financial pain of the past few weeks. It was an incredible offer, a chance to walk back into the company as a true hero and leader. I listened politely to the chairman's entire offer. I let him finish all his big promises and impressive numbers. When he finally stopped talking, I thanked him sincerely for his time and his very generous offer. I told him I truly appreciated the board's recognition of my competence and my work. The chairman sounded very pleased, probably thinking he had just successfully hired me back. Then, calmly and with a confidence I didn't know I had, I gently declined. I informed him that I would not be returning to the Zenith Group. I told him that I had already made other, better plans for my future. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening and lasted for a long time. The chairman was stunned. He tried to argue, telling me how big the opportunity was, but I stayed firm. I had worked too hard and been betrayed too deeply to go back to a place that had treated me so horribly. My declaration of independence was the sweetest victory of all. 2 weeks after declining the chairman's offer, I officially launched my own risk assessment firm. I called it Aegis Solutions. The name sounded strong and safe, like a shield. I used the money I had saved, plus the profits from the early success of Project Sphinx from my personal projects, to set up a beautiful office downtown. I was finally working for myself. My very first client was the chief executive officer of Vanguard Capital, the company that had walked away from the $1.8 billion deal. The CEO had been so incredibly impressed with the precise, detailed, and completely accurate anonymous analysis that saved his company a fortune. He used his huge resources to track down the source of the tip, me, Jennifer. He hired my new firm immediately on a massive contract. My first contract was with a company that had been the unwitting target of the failed deal, and it instantly legitimized Aegis Solutions as a serious, major player in the industry. A month later, a major business publication ran a feature article about the whole mess, the collapsed deal, the firings, and the stock crash. But the article didn't stop there. It shifted the focus completely to me. The feature article positioned me not as a bitter saboteur, as Mr. Alastair had tried to claim, but as a visionary whistleblower and the only competent professional in the entire story. The article subtly explained that my expertise had saved the day for Vanguard Capital. The public narrative was completely fixed. I was no longer the fired employee. I was the genius who had spotted the problem when no one else would. My new firm, Aegis Solutions, immediately received a huge, incredible flood of new inquiries from other companies who were terrified of making the same mistake. My name became known across the industry as the ultimate expert in finding hidden risks. The most ironic, beautiful twist came 6 months later. The Zenith Group, the company that had fired me, was still struggling desperately to regain its reputation and the trust of its investors. They were trying to launch a new, major acquisition, but their own board and investors wouldn't approve it until an independent, highly respected expert had given it a final, perfect seal of approval. They put out a request for proposals for a high-level risk assessment. My firm, Aegis Solutions, submitted a proposal. They accepted it. The Zenith Group became a paying client of my firm, begging for my help. I was the person they had thrown out, and now I was the only person who could save their business credibility. I didn't hesitate. I charged them exactly triple my standard rate for the work. They paid it immediately. Mr. Alastair, now working for a tiny, failing company, probably saw the invoice and knew exactly who was making them pay. The fate of the fallen villains was exactly what they deserved. The great Mr. Alastair, the man who had fired me, was completely unable to find a real job in his industry. He was forced to take a humiliating, low-level advisory role at a much smaller, non-public firm. His huge name and reputation were in tatters, replaced by the ugly memory of the $1.8 billion disaster. Caleb, the spoiled nephew who had caused the whole mess, was even worse off. Having never truly held a real job or done a day of honest work, he couldn't get hired anywhere. His name was a joke in every financial office in the city. He eventually had to sell his expensive car and move back in with his parents, spending his days playing video games and complaining about how the world had treated him unfairly. Their lives were ruined by their own greed and lack of respect for real talent. 1 year later, my firm, Aegis Solutions, was the absolute gold standard in the risk assessment industry. I had a full team of smart, loyal analysts who worked hard but always left the office by 5 p.m. I was the CEO, the face, and the genius behind the entire operation. I made more money in 1 month than I used to make in a whole year at the Zenith Group. I was now in a position of true power. I didn't just take any client who offered money. I chose my clients based on their ethics, their honesty, and their respect for their employees. I had built the career and the business that I always deserved, one that valued competence over family ties and honesty over quick, greedy profits. My new empire was built on a solid foundation of truth and expertise, and it was glorious. I stood on the huge stage at a major industry conference, giving the keynote speech to hundreds of top business leaders. I was powerful, respected, and completely confident. I spoke about the importance of deep, ethical due diligence in business deals. I ended my speech with a strong, clear message. I looked out at the huge audience, my voice ringing out clearly. Some people, I said, see a house of cards and they try to prop it up with lies and false optimism. They hope it won't fall down. I paused for a beat, but I choose a different way. I choose to build my business, my success, and my life on bedrock instead. The audience applauded wildly. As I stepped off the stage, I saw a familiar, defeated-looking man slipping quickly out of a back door in the far corner of the room. It was Mr. Alistair. He was just a ghost now, a forgotten part of my past. I smiled, knowing the lesson was permanent. I didn't just win. I built a new, better world where his kind of corruption couldn't survive.